Let's do it. Let's do it. I love the meeting being recorded voice. It's always my favorite.
Yeah. Like the ultimate robot voice.
Yeah, it is. It's like the ultimate, like, you've joined. This meeting is recorded. Like, please behave. Always a good time.
A very low quality voice. Yeah, I love it.
What they should do is, like, it'd be brilliant, with like cameos, all the actors and everything should just start recording their own like Zoom little like audio clips, like this meeting is being recorded, and then you could like go buy them. Like you could buy the Cardi B meeting is being recorded.
Absolutely.
Or any of these other ones. It'd be amazing.
That'd be cool. That's like, yeah, we should sell that idea. Or you should sell it. It's your idea.
It's my idea. You can have it, Jen. I have enough businesses to run. I'm all good with the other thing. The Cameo guys are hysterical. When I was living in Chicago, I knew them and went to a couple of their events. And I remember at the time, everyone was like, this is such a weird business. And then it just blew up and everyone's like, no, this is so smart. And then anybody who was like skeptical was like, yeah, I really missed the boat on this one. It seems like it's now a really good idea. Like all good things, you don't realize it's super brilliant until after the fact.
That's it, right? Okay, I think we can get started. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jan. I'm the HubSpot Ops community moderator, and welcome to this AMA. With us today, we of course have Connor Jeffers. If you don't know him, he is the founder and CEO of Aptitude 8, which is a Rev-Ops technology consulting firm and a HubSpot Diamond Solutions Partner, but I think you're on the road to becoming elite soon.
On the cusp. On the cusp. Riding Operations Hub to make it happen.
Exactly. So besides running the day-to-day, Connor is also active as a RevOps instructor here, teaching courses to other solutions agencies on how to provide basically RevOps services to their customers. I'm very excited to have Connor here, and just as a RevOps expert, as an operations thought leader, and stuff like that. And hopefully that bio did you some justice. How are you doing today, Connor?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here. I think I'm all good with the bio. Nothing to add. Just excited to be here talking about Operations Hub, which is one of the most exciting things that's happened in recent history for us. So we're just really excited to be here.
Yeah, I think so too. Also, thank you everyone for joining. And just as an FYI to the group, this is an Ask Me Anything news, so you can basically ask Connor any questions you may have for him. Do whatever you're comfortable with, whether that's chat or audio only. It doesn't matter. If you're comfortable with, just leave your questions with us and we'll handle the rest. And we're just here to learn from Connor and from each other. So we're just here to have a good time. The reason why, and of course, Connor already touched on this subject. The reason why we're having this AMA is because Operations Hub launched last week. And of course, Connor wrote this brilliant Operations Hub Playbook full of recipes and interesting stuff that you can do with Operations Hub. Connor, just to start us off, like in your own words, how would you describe Operations Hub? Why is it like game changing?
Yeah, absolutely. Operations Hub is really, really exciting. I think for us, it's probably the most significant and exciting thing that's happened since the custom objects release. And I think really takes that to the next level. One of the things that I think has been not necessarily a limiter, but just like the breadth of what HubSpot was capable of previously was you were really restricted to the actions that HubSpot's team created and made available to you, which was vast and ever expanding. And we had new features all the time. But sometimes you ran into automations you wanted to build, features you wanted to create, functions you wanted to perform, and you just couldn't do them because they either required too many different steps, or you couldn't get data across different objects or tables, or the sort of native workflow automation rules weren't going to support what you were trying to do. And so the reason the Operations Hub is so significant is essentially all those barriers are removed. You can now really automate essentially anything directly from HubSpot. And you can now write code entirely inside of HubSpot, which really pushes the boundaries of what the system is capable of even further. And I think the piece that we get the most excited about is that you may have some code that gets written into the tool, but those can then be leveraged with declarative automation and the workflows and lists and all the combination of features that people are used to in HubSpot. And it really expands HubSpot to be a true platform that you can really customize to achieve whatever your goals are, as opposed to really a sales platform, a marketing platform, a service platform. And now it has really amazing out-of-the-box features to serve each one of those use cases, but you can expand that functionality to anything you might want to be able to support, which is really, really exciting.
Yeah, I think so too. And I don't think I can summarize any of what you just said. It's just a brand new, there's really no boundaries anymore. And it's as flexible as your automation, as your imagination, basically, right? What were like the first things, because you got like access to some of the features a bit earlier as a solutions partner. What were the first things that went through your head when you just got the announcement that we were building these types of tools?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the thing that's the most exciting for us is as a solutions partner, right? I mean, our business is helping people build things on top of HubSpot. And as a RevOps partner, we're really focused on how that works with the solutions architecture and how you're really deploying a platform to achieve a specific goal. And so being able to go in and say, we can write some JavaScript directly into a coded action. A non-developer can reuse those actions and copy and paste those into other workflows. And we can really leverage those and string them together with other native features was really exciting. I think, especially when we work with other platforms or other CRM systems that may support code, you're rarely able to sort of weave the declarative automation that a marketer or an operations person or somebody on the sales management might be able to do, along with some of the development functionality that's really exclusive to custom code. And being able to weave those two things together is really amazing, and I think really speaks to some of the product design on the HubSpot product folks, because having that in a workflow and activated by a workflow, as opposed to like building a trigger or something somewhere else that lives outside of the tools people use every day, was really, really exciting. And I think the direction that I've been really amazed by, and I was playing with some of the new functionality last night and sent an email to one of the product managers, just like admiring some of the elegance of some of the different sync pieces, which today support contacts. And I know in the near future, the goal is to have them certainly expand to more objects, but the ease of use with some of those and sort of the future state that I see of expanding those to allowing people to use that sync framework with other systems and expand into it is really exciting. And I think we're really just seeing the beginning of what's really going to reshape what HubSpot is and what's capable of it, which for us on the solutions partner side is extremely exciting. And I think for anybody who's a customer already, should also be really exciting of seeing the HubSpot team expand on what's already available.
Yeah, I think it's a very promising as well. Now, like, you already touched upon these things, but when you got your hands on the beta, like what were the first things that you tried out? Were there any ideas in your head that you like said, like, the first thing I want to do is this specific workflow?
Yeah, the first thing, I think some of the main things that we were looking at is like, how can we push data to other systems without needing third-party connectors or without needing sort of like a Zapier or something else in the middle? Was one of the big things. We run into requests for that all the time. And I know in the playbook, a bunch of examples we have sort of are based off of like push integrations or pull integrations and connecting to other systems. And so some of the first things that we really looked at is how can we take a triggered workflow action from HubSpot, which could be a ticket being created or a deal being closed, and push that information to another system or sort of sync it to multiple systems or maybe request data from other places. And being able to do that all within the workflow action was probably the area that we were the most excited about. And then being able to do some of the contact level syncs to other systems and really seeing how easy that is to set up also gets us really excited, because today when we work with customers, those can be really daunting large scale projects just so to build those data connectors, and being able to see sort of like how that's going to become something we can expand upon and make that a lot easier for customers to achieve makes us really excited about really what the future looks like of a sort of HubSpot being a hub in a weird way, but to the ecosystem of all the other tools in the business versus something that lives on the side.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was my internet or was it your internet?
It's probably mine, unfortunately. I'm in a shared co-working space, and so the internet is sometimes iffy. But I'm happy to answer again, or we can move on. It's up to you.
All right. So just as an FYI to the people on this call, feel free to leave your questions in the chat. I'm going to ask Connor a little bit more questions, and then I'm going to hand it over to all of you. So Connor, you talked about the playbook already a little bit. Like, it really, like when I wrote it, I was read it, sorry. It really is an awesome bundle of all the creative ways in which you can use these new custom coded actions to achieve and solve a lot of very complex business problems. You've talked to a lot of other HubSpot users, and you clearly have a very strong vision on what these new tools do for larger businesses. But if you're like a smaller business that doesn't necessarily have an operations team yet, what can Operations Hub do for you now?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the basic starter functions are really, really helpful. I think some of the ways, and we have an example in the playbook around like content syndication and list imports, but being able to standardize information. So something we see all the time in projects that we do with customers is I have this giant database. I've imported data from tons of systems over time, and I have all my first names aren't necessarily capitalized, and I'm merging those into emails, and they sort of don't look like I really have good information on people, or you have misformatted date fields. And some of the starter functionality will allow you to clean up a lot of that data programmatically, which is really exciting, and all without knowing any code at all or really having any robust technical background. It's all just sort of declarative automation, and something that should save you tons of time, because pre-Operations Hub, you would have had to export those lists, export that data, clean it up in Excel, re-import everything, and just removing the need to do that somewhere else before you get data into HubSpot is really exciting, and allows people to automate some of that data cleaning, which I think is really valuable. The other piece that I would challenge for anybody who is coming into this and thinking, I don't have a developer, I don't have someone who knows how to write JavaScript, like how can I use this? By creating some development scripts, you can have somebody come in, you explain to them your use case, a developer has to write some code, but then it all lives directly inside of HubSpot, and you don't need additional knowledge or maintaining another server or understanding sort of how you manage some of that API framework. It's all data that's just going to be stored inside of HubSpot, and now that script is something you can leverage and reuse over time, which is really, really exciting. And I think with slight modifications, the same way you'd use sort of any other contractor, you should be able to leverage a lot of this functionality without necessarily having ongoing in-house development support.
Yeah, I think so too. Just before we move over, I just wanted to ask you one more question, because you're a RevOps expert and we have this RevOps community. To the folks on this call who aren't necessarily very familiar with RevOps, can you briefly just explain what is RevOps and why should companies adopt it, basically?
Yeah, for sure. So we've been doing, I think it's interesting because early in my career, we we're doing a lot of like RevOps stuff without really knowing what term to apply to it. And now we're sort of putting it out there as RevOps. So when we think about RevOps and the role of RevOps, we really look at it as ultimately your customer experience is a part of your product and your service, and how you deliver that customer experience is powered by the technology that your business uses. And so the less efficient and the more siloed your data is, the worse your customer experience is. No one likes going into any sort of service relationship. If you think about even on the consumer side, you go into a business, they don't remember maybe your sizes, they don't remember what types of rooms you look for, or I know we're dealing with one right now because we're actively looking at new apartments, and I think we have like 4 bookings at the same apartment, and we're just like, man, like we're already talking to you even though we're talking to somebody else. And being able to break down those silos and connect the different data points in your business, automate as many of the processes as you can. And really, I think the 2 outputs when we look at RevOps as a problem is, how can you deliver a better customer experience by putting the information about that customer and about their relationship with your business in front of the people who are working with them in that moment. And then the second piece is, how can you eliminate minutia and boring experiences and copying and pasting from your internal team's workflow so that they're really focused on the work that matters, and really identifying where are there breakdowns in our internal systems to prevent getting the data to where it needs to go to create that customer experience. And then where are the pieces in our process that people spend a lot of time, and it's not critical thinking time, it's not expertise time, it's not communicating with a customer time, it's really just managing some internal process that could be automated, and how can you focus on improving that piece of the funnel and that part of the experience. And so when we think about RevOps, it's really, how can you create a better customer experience, and then how can you create a better experience for the people that work at your company by eliminating parts of their day and automating pieces of your business wherever possible.
Yeah. And how does that then tie back to Operations Hub? Because Well,
Yeah.
I'm a HubSpot marketer. We have marketed Operations Hub as like a way to adopt RevOps at your company. But tell us about that. Like, how can we use these tools and features to actually be RevOps experts at our own
Yeah,
companies?
absolutely. So I think two of the examples I've touched on, but really getting into the details on functionality, right? So one is in terms of data hygiene, data cleansing, um, data automation, using some of the starter functionality and being able to clean up and capitalize the fields, or be able to consolidate date formats into consistent pieces. That's something that previously someone would need to go through list management processes. So if you're importing lists, it's something that we run into a lot on the marketing side is with sort of different strategies like content syndication. You might get 12 lists from 12 different vendors, and they all have different fields and they all have different formats, and you're trying to get everything, and then you're trying to import that data into your system, and you get errors because it says, oh, sorry, this particular value imported isn't supported in that dropdown. And so now you need to go open your file, and the answer is because that vendor added a hyphen between these two fields and you didn't. And you can use Operations Hub to clean up all of that data, build those processes and systematize them. And now you're eliminating something that's extremely frustrating from someone's day to day. And so there's a reward in it of saying, I'm focusing you on work that matters, but you're also returning time back into the organization overall and eliminating different parts of that piece. And so I think that's one. The second one that we run into, and one that I think is really exciting in Operations Hub, is with integrations and coded actions and working with other systems, which is something we see really often. Is you can use HubSpot to, whenever a deal is marked closed won, send an automated email to the finance team to go create all the billing details, send an automated email to the fulfillment team to go create the project in their project management system. And now using Operations Hub, you can use APIs from those other systems to go and push that data over there automatically, sync that information automatically, and you're no longer reliant on and creating processes that require people to copy paste information and transpose data. You're really just equipping them to execute on the work. And so when we think about Operations Hub as something to empower RevOps teams, is no longer do RevOps teams need to think about all the different tools and the ways to kind of stitch them together with duct tape and glue. And now they can power a lot of that workflow directly from HubSpot, and really gives them a tool inside the rest of their stack to automate a lot of the functionality that today people might be doing manually or sort of facilitating with handoffs.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's it really gives time back to the company, and really prevents a lot of like data fires and manual work focused on fixing integrations, stuff like that. I think I'm going to hand it over to the audience. I already got a couple of questions in. Let's start with the first one by John. Can you perhaps explain some of the segmentation of products? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand the basic version has synchronization via standardized set of data points. But what level do I need to be able to interface various APIs? We're making a major move to HubSpot from an in-house system, and there are a lot of interfaces not all well documented. Can you talk more about that, Connor?
Yeah, absolutely. So John, congrats on. I'll start specifically to Operations Hub of which tiers the functionalities are at, and then I'll speak a little bit to my understanding of some of the bundling and pricing, though I know it is constantly changing, and some HubSpot reps of the pricing page is probably the best place to go for completely accurate information. But I can speak to the difference between the two products. So when we're talking about leveraging different APIs and triggering coded actions and being able to write code directly inside of HubSpot, all of that is professional level features. So that's in the Operations Hub Pro. The Operations Hub Starter has some basic sync functionality, and then I believe some of the automation around date fields or some of these other pieces. And then Starter is really just sort of like a taste of some of those different features. So it's not that Starter can't add value by any means. It's certainly useful, but I think most of the things that I'll speak to around interfacing with APIs, writing scripts, connecting to other systems that have web-based connectors, all of that's going to be pro level functionality. I will just say that the new bundles, so I think that there's a new CRM bundle that has like pro of every hub or something to that effect. We just upgraded our system. So previously for our own business, and we do services across every HubSpot hub. So I'd be happy to chat with you directly, John, around like what you guys are trying to do and if we can help. But we do services on every hub, but internally, we historically were using the Sales Hub and the Marketing Hub and then CMS Hub for our website. And we upgraded to the CRM Pro and to the CMS Enterprise. And our upgrade cost was less than us sort of buying everything at once. And so highly encourage the new bundles. They're really, really awesome and have a little bit of every tool. And you'll usually, I think, get more value from a bundle than one specific suite, and then adding on the rest of them, which HubSpot's sort of moving, I think, to saying, here's all the CRM platform tools. But whoever your AE is probably the best person to talk to about bundling for you, but hopefully that answers your question.
All right. We have another question about April, from April. Do you see new features like these changing the toolkit that RevOps personnel need to possess? Do you think I should be signing up for JavaScript courses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's a really good question. So I'll give you a little bit of an anecdote and then also how I think you should tackle these types of problems. So on our team, when we manage a lot of these services for customers, we have RevOps consultants that are really familiar with objects and data schema and helping people figure out operational workflows and helping people design solutions to those problems. And then we also have developers who are focused on writing actual code. And so in our world, rarely do we look at those as being all in the same skill set. And we really look at those as the RevOps person's job is to identify the problem, figure out what the solution to that problem could look like, and then sort of architect how to build that solution, which would include which APIs do I need to look at, which data needs to move where, which objects are involved, which users are using those objects. And that's really the RevOps problem. And then they would manage or work with a developer, whether internal or external, to write the actual script. The main thing I think is important here is that when we talk about the Operations Hub workflows using those coded actions, the code itself is usually pretty lightweight. We're not talking about incredibly complex engineering. We're talking about a relatively simple piece of JavaScript. And the elegance is really in defining when should this code run, what API should this code connect to, and what should this code do. And a developer should be able to write that kind of a script relatively easily if they have a background in JavaScript. I don't think that means that a RevOps professional should go learn JavaScript in order to be useful. I think it'll certainly be an added value skill, but I think that being able to read JavaScript, understand which fields it's interfacing with, and maybe tweak those versus developing an entire script and also understanding the process piece is likely a better combination of skills than necessarily being able to do all of it. But I think there's certainly value in being able to understand and work with JavaScript the same way that to a marketer, understanding HTML and CSS might be really valuable. Even if they themselves wouldn't say, I'm a full front-end developer, they could probably augment some CSS to control some fields on a form on a page without necessarily needing to bother a developer, if that makes sense.
I think it does. We also have another question. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Another question is how a HubSpot agency can become an expert in RevOps and offer RevOps services to clients. Do technical HubSpot agency have the advantage of becoming RevOps agencies?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's certainly a skill set that can be learned. I think a lot of folks that are in and around the space can gather it. I think when we look at making hires, we look at folks who've been in an operations position, folks who've owned tech stacks, people who've been responsible for building and connecting different systems. I think if you're a true marketing agency, I think that there's tons of value still to be had in being a marketing agency. And I don't necessarily think that means you need to go and say, we must offer Operations Hub services or we must become a RevOps agency because that's where the attention is. I think that there's still tons of marketing work to be done, and same with service and sales. What I see as being different is when we look at RevOps projects, it's usually implementations, it's usually coming in and building something and then sort of setting somebody up for success and stepping away versus the model where you have some ongoing services you're running every month, then you're maybe managing paid media or you're performing inbound marketing work. And I think some technical partners, it's usually easier to scale technical development. So sort of what I talked about previously around the skill set of those RevOps professionals are people who can understand process and systems architecture and how to really build something. And it's usually easier to find developers that can support those people, I think, than it is to say, we're predominantly a technical development shop and we want to start offering the consulting side services. I know my background and all the folks in our consulting team's background is largely in being an operations leader and building and managing stacks. And I think that that's the skill set that's a little harder to transition into. If you have that skill set already, adding in the technical script writing, I think, is an easier lift than going from we're a full force technical shop, and now we're going to also start adding some of the strategy and the sort of RevOps consulting services as well. Totally an opinion. I think lots of people are capable of lots of things. So by no means should that discourage or encourage anybody to change the direction of their business.
All right, we just got another question by Kat. As a RevOps person, how do we know what is possible using JavaScript in HubSpot? Is there a rundown of the types of problems this feature can solve for?
Yes. So we and I think is available or will be sent out as a follow-up to this. If not, it's on our website. Feel free to check it out, which is we did the Operations Hub Playbook. And our goal was really to help people who don't necessarily have a full understanding of JavaScript and APIs and how some of those technical pieces work to really get an understanding of what's possible. Our Operations Hub Playbook does not have any code in it. It's not a sort of like, here's a bunch of scripts you can use. It's very much here's a bunch of examples of the types of problems that you could solve. And here's how you would think about solving those problems. I would say if you have an understanding of what APIs are available, what those APIs can do. So if you say, I can, with a deal API, I can create a deal, I can update a deal, I can get information about a deal, I can delete a deal. And if you understand what's possible in those APIs, you can start to stitch together an idea of how those things would work. And JavaScript is really just the language to interface with those APIs. The fact that it's JavaScript versus another language isn't super important. It just happens to be what Operations Hub runs on. And if you have an understanding of some of those APIs and object level pieces, you can start to design some of the functions you can perform with an Operations Hub workflow. The best way to really think about it is if you have an understanding of what's possible with code, then really the only extension you need to make is Operations Hub will let you write code in a workflow. And so all the logic you may have in a workflow, which could say person is added to this list or filtered actions or anything else that's really possible that you may do with an advanced workflow tool, you can now use a lot of that declarative functionality and then extend it with sort of like that spell, which is the Operations Hub JavaScript. And you can weave that into the rest of your functionality.
Cool. Let me know if that answers your question, Kat. I have another question for you, Connor. Now, the features are now all a week old. Are there any cool things that you've seen done with like the custom coded workflows already with your customers or anywhere else?
So internet dropped right at the beginning of that question, which makes me nervous about my answers. But is there any chance I can get you to repeat it?
Sure. So the features are now like a week old. What are the cool stuff you've seen happening with those features? Things you may not have thought about, like in the playbook or. Absolutely.
I think one of the things that's so exciting about this is really the breadth of what's possible is just so much bigger than it was before. And one of the things that we just started working on with the customer is we're working with a customer and they sell different types of insurance plans and they're managing their deals. And so they're associating a product for each plan to the deal. And then what they want to be able to do is empower their service team so that once a deal is won, their service team can sort of go through the process of procuring and implementing that plan. And previously, pre-Operations Hub, their problem was they could use a standard HubSpot workflow to, when a deal was marked won, create a ticket, move that ticket through a process. And the constraint that they were running into was they didn't want one ticket. They wanted one ticket per product. And then they also wanted those tickets to be dynamic. So they wanted those tickets to have information about all the products associated to a deal. And so with Operations Hub, we can write a coded action, and the coded action is pretty simple. So what that coded action does is when a deal is marked closed won, we run this coded action. The coded action goes to the deals API and finds the deal that had that ID. It pulls the products related to that deal and the information about those products, which is just a GET request on the deals API. And then it creates one ticket per product associated to that deal, and then copies all the information in those products into those tickets. And that's a workflow that we hadn't conceived of, hadn't thought about as being valuable. HubSpot themselves, right? You guys would never think, oh, we should build an action in HubSpot that lets you create a ticket for every product on a deal, because that particular use case is so specific. But I think what's so exciting about Operations Hub is it really empowers users to build those types of functions without necessarily knowing what that feature set's going to look like up front, and really unlocks the potential in kind of an unlimited way.
Cool. Like, I think your internet fell away like in those last parts.
Yeah.
Do you mind like repeating the last couple of sentences that you said?
Where did I cut off?
I'm not sure, but it was right before you finished.
Okay. What I would say is being able to think through those workflows and that type of a feature is something that HubSpot wouldn't create for you, because it's super specific and it's something that not a lot of people would want to use, but it is a feature that's possible, and you could build, using the API and using custom functionality. And so what's really exciting for us is seeing not just what we think is an out of the box thing that you might be able to set up, but really that you can build any custom solution to support any type of workflow you might want to. And that's where I think Operations Hub is really exciting. And we're just really seeing and scratching the surface of what's possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. We had another question. In learning the use of HubSpot within the context of RevOps, what aspects of the learning do you recommend prioritizing to maximize one's grasp of the basics, like creating simple plus effective workflows, importing data, mapping data, creating ways to track relevant KPIs? He's new to HubSpot, so you just want to see that it's very powerful. And I think scrolling down a little bit, he's in the process of potentially becoming a RevOps professional. So how can you help him?
What's up, Ade? I'll talk to you very soon. Ade is currently in our hiring process. But I will tell you the answer to this question, which is I would start with the basic workflow automation and understanding the objects in HubSpot. I think the data model and the schema is really important. So what is a company? What is a deal? What is a contact? How do these things relate to one another? And how do you think about the data schema? And then really understanding what's possible with out-of-the-box workflows. So creating records, updating records, and really starting to see where the limitations are. When you start to run into things that you can't do this in the standard workflow tools, there's something that's really, you can't make that jump, you can't make that association, you can't manage those things as dynamically. And that's where I think the Operations Hub functionality starts to really shine, as it eliminates those limitations entirely. And I think you really need a good grasp on what can I do with the tools I have before you can start thinking about how would I potentially push that feature further. And I would suggest sort of like having a really deep understanding of standard objects and schema and standard workflow automation, and then thinking about what would I want to do that I can't. And that's where I think Operations Hub really starts to shine, is patching some of those, how would I do this even though there's not a native way to do it.
Like, I was thinking about Ade, and he's in the hiring process. Like, what does a career in RevOps actually look like? Like, take you, for instance, you have a bit of you run an agency, of course, but you've been in RevOps a long time. Like, RevOps doesn't really seem like a fad. It's here to say, like, what does that career look like if you start now?
Yeah, I think I think the space is exploding. I think anybody who's considering a career in RevOps, I think you're really setting yourself up for 10, 20, 30 years of ongoing growth in the space. And so I just definitely encourage anybody who is evaluating it. I think when we look at a career in RevOps, if you're internal, it's really focused on how can I make the lives of the people who work here easier, and how can I make the customer experience better? And that's really the problems you're focused on. And the tooling to solve those problems is, what's a database and how does a database work? What are automation tools, and where do automation tools drive value versus what's overkill on what's possible? And I think really understanding what those tools are capable of, what tools in the space, and then you can really start to get an understanding of the differences between various platforms and tools, and what's good and not good at different types of tasks. And I think that the biggest thing is really understanding how a customer experience is delivered across sales teams and marketing teams and service teams, and how all of that really branches from that same base point, which is, who is this customer? Who is this person? And what do they want and care about? And how can I give that to them? And ultimately, when you're looking at a career in RevOps, I think that there's tremendous amounts of a deep understanding on business process and what that means and how it works, some technical understanding to be able to build and configure those tools, and then being able to really help people and extract from people what their needs are, is really the skills that I think are most valuable. And some of the technical chops you can learn along the way, and you can manage other people to execute. I think the magic is really understanding a process and understanding what it takes to improve it, and then being able to sort of put that into place.
Yeah. So we have another question from Mike Rizzo. At what point do you consult a client to remove Zapier integration in favor of Operations Hub? I think this is a good one.
This is a really good one. This is one we're really excited about. I think Operations Hub is much more powerful than Zapier, especially if HubSpot is the core of your stack. And the reason that I say that is, if you're working with Zapier, you need an enterprise level hub to be firing webhooks over to Zapier. You then need to parse those webhooks using Zapier's functionality. And then you can now run other actions with Zapier, but you're going to be limited by sort of the ways that you can configure Zapier itself. And you also are going to always need to manage kind of that data handoff. And the amazing functionality, I think, of Operations Hub is that because it's built on Lambda, an Operations Hub coded action can both send and make call outs to other places and process the responses from those call outs. So from Aptitude 8, from the way that we're looking at the universe, we really plan on not pushing people towards Zapier at all anymore, really, and managing almost all that functionality with HubSpot. The only other exclusion to that would be if you're really trying to drive triggered events from systems that aren't HubSpot at all. So the system that actually causes that trigger is not HubSpot. But as you start to see HubSpot become more and more of your stack, having that live directly inside of HubSpot is incredibly valuable, because you can use all of those workflow branches and the logic and then the after steps inside of HubSpot, as opposed to sort of like, and I assume, Mike, you've sort of like built these things before and ping ponged data from HubSpot to Zapier, back to HubSpot, back to Zapier. And with Operations Hub, you can eliminate a lot of those pieces and just run it directly inside of HubSpot, which I think is really the power.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. We have a question by Bill. For portals that are currently using PySync, how will this transition happen?
My answer, unfortunately, on this one is probably like, I don't know. I can tell you that I think the answer is PySync is now Operations Hub. And if you're using Operations Hub Starter, it's already in your portal, and that is PySync, and it's just moving some of those PySync connectors into the marketplace. But expanding beyond that, I would suggest talking to your account manager or to whoever you have at HubSpot in terms of how it affects your specific contract. I don't know how the billing or how any of those other pieces work. I do know that some of the base level pricing functionality can all now be found in the solutions marketplace in HubSpot. So if you go to the app marketplace and you search for one of the systems that you would connect to via PySync, so some of the ones out of the box, like the NetSuite Contact Sync or some of those other ones, those are actually in the app marketplace inside of HubSpot now. If that doesn't answer your question, then I may not know the detail you're looking for, but hopefully that gets you some of the direction.
Yeah, let us know, Bill. We have another question by Niranjan. What new important Rev-Ops KPIs with the track now with Operations Hub can be tracked now? Sorry.
So this one I think is a little difficult to answer, but I'll speak to what I think this is asking, which is that we're seeing essentially the ability to, so one of the examples in the Operations Hub Playbook is around SDR reporting. So one of the things that we saw people struggle with was they wanted to, on a deal, so they wanted to create a deal report inside of HubSpot that said which SDR booked this deal, booked the meeting that created this deal, which marketing event that occurred, within the last 90 days on a primary contact led to this deal. And using a coded action, we can sort of configure a lot of those parameters. And then when a deal is marked closed won, we can go and look up the contacts that are associated to that deal and say, tell me which contact associated to this deal had a discovery call within the last 90 days. And then we can grab which SDR booked that meeting and we can stamp their name on the deal in a custom field. And we can do the same thing for the marketing activities on those contacts. And then we can stamp those on the deal. And so I think one of the things that we see a lot, and this is around like data orchestration, which is something we see a lot, is people want to be able to build reports that pull information from 15 different places, and getting that all into one report is really challenging. And so being able to instead run a coded action, find that information, pull it all into a single deal, and then you could build a report that says, show me all of my deals and which marketing channel generated the meeting and which sales rep booked that meeting, and it's show all of that on a deal with like a summary of revenue or something. And instead of pulling a bunch of Excel files from a whole bunch of places and aggregating all that data and trying to get it into one report, you can sort of do that directly within HubSpot by pulling that information from various places and stamping it all into a single record.
Okay, let us know if that answered your question. He says, thanks. I got a DM by someone asking, where do I start with an automation strategy? Do I just use one system or do I start with multiple systems?
That is a hard question. I'm going to do my best. What we do when we're working with a customer, so one of our most popular service offerings is we do a lot of audits. So we'll do systems and strategy audits, and we'll work with companies to really map out what are all the different tools in their stack, how do those tools connect to each other, how are you managing all of your business process today, and how should you do it if everything was much tighter. And we do those services a lot. And the way that we start those is we dive through all the systems, we interview all of the staff, and we really build out what we call a current state model, which is like a big diagram of all of those components connected. And then what we do from there is we really sort of start to figure out which one of those parts is the most painful, which part slows things down the most, which part prevents information from getting where it needs to go. And then we'll sort of like figure out, that's where I would start, right? Instead of sort of saying, how do we boil the ocean? I would look at like, what is a process that happens internally that is incredibly painful, slows people down, creates a negative customer experience, and which is something that we can focus on. A really like tangible example, and this is somebody that we were talking to recently. He's new to an operations role at his company, and he's trying to figure out like which problem to solve first, which is similar to I think the position you're in. And what he picked was the sales reps in their process have to submit a credit check against new potential customers. And that has to go from sales, go to finance, come back to sales, give the person payment terms. Then they have to adjust the contract manually, send that out to the customer. And so that's the process he's focused on automating, and it involves multiple systems and multiple teams. But the output is sales reps should spend less time managing credit requests. Finance should have to be bothered less by sales asking them for credit requests, and customers get faster turnarounds on their contracts. And I think when you can check off the box of makes internal employees' lives easier, creates a better customer experience, eliminates manual work, that's really sort of like the thing that I would focus around automating versus expanding to whatever might be the easiest.
Right. Robin asked, do you charge of the systems audit? I'm not sure exactly what he means. If you could expand on that, Robin.
I can answer. I mean, the answer is yes, we do charge on systems audits.
Okay.
And we sell a lot of systems audits as like, that's the service. And we have we sell those to, like, we have private equity groups that buy those, and they buy them as part of their due diligence on potential acquisitions. We do a lot of audits with new executives to companies that are trying to get a handle on what their tech stack is. It's very much a service we offer versus something that we do up front in order to sell additional services. And the deliverables are, big consulting style, like decks and diagrams and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, cool. Everyone, please leave your questions in the chat or send them to me via DM. In the meantime, let me ask you one more question. Because we're talking about this audit, I had this idea, like when I was back in support, I used to do PySync support. There was always when a customer came to me with like a case, I needed to do like a bit of consulting. I needed to check like how does his processes work, like what kind of workflows does he have, what data is manipulated which way, because that could impact, of course, the way his data is syncing through PySync. So I had like a minor checklist that I went through. Like when you get asked by a company to just do some operational consulting, is there a certain checkbox that you have in your mind that you go through to see like where things go wrong operationally, or like gauge the healthiness of their operations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thesis to this is like the elegance, I think, in being an operations professional is helping people zoom out. People will often, I think you experience this obviously sort of in your experience, Jan, which is that people will come in and be like, hey, this particular field isn't syncing. Can you help me fix that? And what you want to do is be like, wait a minute, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? What's like the outcome that you're trying to get to? And tell me about the problem that you're having, and tell me about what an ideal solution looks like. And then on our end, our role is to help you connect to those two dots. And the elegance is really extracting from people what's the problem, what's the pain point that they have, and what's their version of what an ideal solution looks like. And I think the area that's most common to get mired and stuck in is people that want to focus on, well, all I really want is to get this, from A to B, and that's all I care about. And you're like, well, what's the reason it needs to get there? What does B look like? Why is this a pain point at all? And really focusing on those pieces. And that's usually where we like to start, is getting a really good understanding of what the problem we're trying to solve is, and then having a really good understanding of what their ideal version of the future looks like. And sometimes you can't deliver the ideal future, and that's true. And so you want to sort of understand what makes that ideal, what makes it the best possible situation, and how can I get as close to that as possible without compromising either critical business data or ruining things for other teams. Because every sales rep will tell you, I just want to hit one and then get a commission check instantaneously, and that's their version, right? Like that's like, and they're not wrong, but what you have to do is make sure, how can I make that as easy as possible for you, but also making sure that we manage the finance side and we manage the the rev rec side, and really taking into account all those different perspectives.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you hit the nail on the head there. We have one more question. I think, do you partner with any other HubSpot agencies?
Yeah, we do. We have tons of customers on the HubSpot agency side. We collab with different folks. Shoot me a note, more than happy to chat about it. The biggest thing on our end is we don't white label, because we're set up for a lot of security requirements with our customers, because we tend to work with folks that are a little more sizable, and so they worry a lot about InfoSec and other pieces. So we have a lot of the check boxes on that end, but more than happy to chat about it. Just shoot us a note and we can figure out if there's some way that we can help you, and we'd be super excited if it's a possibility.
Right. And then Mike has another interesting question. Of course, Mike's is like the head of the MoPros community, and he's asking, like, when it comes down to marketing operations versus revenue operations, who owns Operations Hub? I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, it is an interesting question. I'm going to sort of weasel out of your question a little bit, but try to answer it, which is, I would challenge, like, I don't think marketing operations. I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I don't think that marketing operations and revenue operations should be different teams, is like kind of my answer. I think that like when we look at like revenue operations, it's really the how do we do this group. And I think marketing ops get stuck inside of the marketing world sometimes, and they're not knowledgeable of the rest of the stack, or they're not knowledgeable of how they can leverage those other pieces, because they just don't know what's going on across other parts of the organization. And so I think that having marketing ops as a function of RevOps makes a lot of sense, because then it becomes marketing saying, I want to do this campaign. Here's who I want to send it to. Here's the messaging I want to send. And like, here's how I want it to work. And here's the data that I care about. And then the Rev-Ops team and by extension, the marketing ops folks are really saying, okay, cool. How can I build that? What data do I need from which system to deliver that experience? And where do I need to put data that comes out of this campaign in order to deliver you on the tracking and analytics and KPIs that you care about? And so I don't think that marketing ops is necessarily separate from the RevOps team. And I think that both, if it is separate, have use cases for Operations Hub. But I think that because Operations Hub starts to expand to core tech stack automation, it starts to move a lot more to the RevOps side of saying, hey, what do you need? And depending on your org structure, you might have some tension there, but I would suggest solving it instead of saying who should own the tool, as solving it as like, where does marketing ops live in the organization? And are they a marketing function, or are they in a RevOps team? And more interestingly, does RevOps have a seat at the table when marketing and sales and everyone else is talking about what we should do and how? Because I think marketing really defines, here's what we want to do and here's what we want to deliver on. And RevOps gets to say, cool, how can it make that happen for you?
Yeah. I got another DM by Niranjan. Is RevOps more strategic or admin?
I think
personally
RevOps is
both.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, but I do think it's much more strategic. I think like a good RevOps leader, a good RevOps team should probably say no to more requests than they say yes to. And they're less about just executing things other people want and much more about being like, I mean, we get requests. I think it's a lot of like, hey, we want to do X. And you're like, wait, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Is that the same thing that another team is doing? And you're just calling it a different name, and really helping the organization understand what's the goals that they're trying to achieve and which direction are they trying to go and how can I help them get there, versus just fulfilling on requests from other people. And I think that that's really where the need for RevOps arises, is people are used to like, I submit things to the IT team and they make a change in my CRM. And like, no one's saying, is that a change that we should make? And I think that that's really the goal of the RevOps group, is to understand what should you be doing and how should it be done versus just executing against it. I do think that they own the implementation of it as well, but I do think that the administration is a sub bullet point to the strategy, which is the primary lead.
Yeah. So we're almost at time, and just before we leave, I just wanted to ask of you, Connor, and of the audience a bit of like an anecdote to end this AMA on a bit of on a light note. So we've all been there. Now we'd love to hear like, what is like a number one interaction that you still think about from time to time of an interaction that you had with a company that was either absolutely delightful or just downright horrible? You don't need to name any companies,
Sure.
but I'd like to. Yeah, I think it's something that we can all learn from, either to avoid or to adopt.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell one that I love, and also I've been on the road. I used to be on the road all of the time, but I've been moving across the country over the last couple of weeks, and as a result, I've stayed in a fair number of hotels. But I'm a huge Marriott fan, and one of the reasons I'm a huge Marriott fan is that Marriott heavily leverages their CRM, and they create amazing customer experiences as a result. So we have a cute little dog named Logan. He goes with us most places, and when we go to a Marriott, they can see in our visit history that we've had a dog with us a bunch of times. They have his name in their system. When we check in, they're like, "Oh, is Logan with you? Like, do you want to be on a lower floor so that you guys can easily get out? Like, do you need a late checkout?" And those sorts of things really change. I'm interacting with somebody I've never talked to before, sometimes in a city I've never been to, and this person is interacting with me as like, hey, we know who you are. Like, you've already told our company what you want, what you're looking for, what type of experience you want to have. And from a customer experience, that's this really unique and delightful and positive interaction. And the back-end architecture to make that possible is actually incredibly complex and vast. Like, they have to have all of the stays have to get logged as objects. They have to have me in the CRM. And then when I come in, they can pull me up by knowing my loyalty number, a reservation number, or a name or an email, and unifying all of that data across web experience and different branches and different places. And like that, I think, is the perfect example of where RevOps really thrives, is really making it so that all of the back-end architecture that makes that experience possible is invisible to that customer, and no one's ever bouncing back and forth and running into your back-end systems, and instead figuring out how can we deliver on an amazing customer experience by empowering the person that's interacting with that customer with the data they need to make that interaction really personalized and amazing.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing example. If anyone else wants to jump in here and share an example, feel free to do so. In the meantime, let me share, like this is not as extensive as you just talked about, Connor, but here in Belgium, we had a bit of an issue with web shops not being up to date. And not a lot of companies adopting that. So that's been, they've been making a lot of strides lately here in Belgium in making a lot of good web shops. And one company that really nailed it here was actually a Dutch company that moved in here, and they just really nailed the whole customer experience as well. From shopping to shipping, everything's fun, everything is youthful, everything is very nice. And now from time to time, when I think about where should I shop this certain, where should I look for this certain electronics piece, if I don't go for that shop and I have a slightly less good experience, I always like hate myself for not just paying that extra €5 just to go for that other retailer. So I think, yeah, customer experience is all what it comes down to, right? Feel free, everybody here, to share your own examples with us. If no one jumps in, I think we can close off. If we haven't discussed your question, feel free to post it in the HubSpot community. I'll make sure that Connor gets to those questions, or you can also just ask him directly on LinkedIn. I don't think anybody is jumping in here. So thanks so much, Connor, for being here today and talking about Operations Hub. Congrats with the Operations Hub Playbook as well. And thanks everybody, of course, for joining.
Thanks everybody so much. I threw my email in the chat. Feel free to shoot me a note, LinkedIn, HubSpot community, wherever is the easiest for you. More than happy to chat op stuff anytime.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.